Hello, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and dudes of all teen ages, as well as the, gals. My name is Media Mementos, I am here, and y'all are there. Okay, enough with the Chris Chan jokes. Today is my 25th birthday. Actually, it's 2 days after it, but still. This review, which is also the final review on this channel before we switch fully to media history and analysis, is going to be something special. I'm going to introduce you to the horrors of canon movie tales. Now I bet you're looking at the screen and going, what am I looking at? Well, if that's the case, you're not alone. That was my reaction as well. As many of you longtime viewers of this channel know, I collect VHS recordings from television all over the world. And this one here, shelf number 6015, was very special to me when I first saw it. This has 3 movies on it, all with commercials of course, I wouldn't have it any other way, and when I was reading the insert card saying what films were on it, I got kind of confused. Frog Prince? Oh, this must be some kind of family film from the 1960s, right? Just some charming little escapade that's fun for the whole family. No, it's not. It's actually the key that opens the door to a deep, deep rabbit hole from which I have never escaped. And I'm going to drag you all down here with me. First, a little background. Cannon Group was a production company known for making some very bizarre low-budget films like The Happy Hooker Goes to Hollywood, Gas Pump Girls, and Silent Night, Bloody Night. Hey, I said they were low budget, I didn't say they were good. It seems like Cannon had always wanted to throw things at the wall and see what stuck. Whatever it took to make money, they'd do it. And boy, did they have a brand spanking new idea to come up with some of their biggest money ever. Do you know what company makes some very successful films with some strong name appeal? Disney. And you know who was struggling in the 1980s? Disney. Yeah, this is during the Black Cauldron times, folks. Disney may have had some great names before, but they were struggling to come up with any successes now. Which means that it was Cannon's time to strike. Now that the mouse was weak, Cannon Group saw their chance to become the new kings and queens of fairy tale entertainment. And they would do so with their new line of movies, Cannon Movie Tales. There would be 16 films in total, each one based on a recognizable fairy tale like Snow White, Hansel and Gretel, or The Frog Prince. Despite each one being made on a budget of $1.5 to $2 million, they were able to rope in some recognizable names like Helen Hunt, Cloris Leachman, Craig T. Nelson, and Christopher Walken. Most of these movies were shot in Israel and were released theatrically in the late 1980s. While they expected these to be giant hits, they were anything but. The only one with its box office numbers released was Frog Prince, and out of the $1.5 million it cost to make it, it only earned half that in the worldwide box office. And to make matters worse, none of these movies reviewed well either. All the critics noted that they were cheaply made, and while they had some decent acting here and there and maybe a memorable song or two, it all felt soulless and amounted to something that was honestly forgettable and not worth watching whatsoever. Out of the 16 planned films, Cannon only made 9 before deciding to cancel the project and essentially cut their losses. So yeah, I think you can tell what we're getting into here now, right? But before we get into these movies, I've just had a thought. This is gonna be a really big undertaking for me, and I don't know how many times I can sit through these Cannon films before my head explodes. So I think I'm gonna rely on some great friends of mine to help me out. After all, this is my 25th birthday here, so why not use this final review to give back to some of the people who've made my channel and my life in general what it is today. So, yeah, we're doing this. This is officially a giant guest showcase here on Media Mementos, and let's start off with the first film in the lineup, The Frog Prince. Reviewed by my close friend and Patreon executive producer, Blackjack. Take it away, Blackjack!
Yikes, we're starting off with a bad one here. Let's start off with the positives. The animation at the beginning was kind of nice, slow and stilted, but it got the job done. The songs are sung well. Helen Hunt is pretty good here. Yeah, they got it for this movie. No, I don't know why she agreed to this either. The set design is also pretty cool. And that's about it. Firstly, there's a reason that most Frog Prince adaptations tend to only use the original fairy tale as a prompt. It's because when you get down to it, the story can be summarized in 20 words or less. Prince is turned into a frog, he finds a princess, she kisses him, he's human. The end. This movie didn't really get that memo. Instead of doing what Disney would do decades later and add their own characters, twists, and plot beats, this movie decides to stretch the story out to fit an 85-minute long runtime. The story is exactly how I described the original fairy tale, but add an element of some baron coming to the kingdom to determine who the real princess it is. It's either Zora, a silly little girl, or Henrietta, the spawn of Satan. Oh jeez, I wonder who I'll be. This makes the movie feel a lot longer than it really is. When you get down to it, nothing really happens. Zora is made fun of a lot for acting the way a child does. She finds the frog. Frog shows her how to curtsy and dance, and Zora's jealous older sister tries to kill the frog. That's a bit of a stretch. Zora saves him, of course. The frog becomes human, and Zora is the true princess. Everything else is either filler or a really weird musical number. Earlier in this video, Trevor mentioned how Canon tried to compete with Disney, essentially by copying them. After seeing The Frog Prince, I can 100% confirm it. They're copying all the stereotypical aspects of Disney without matching the substance. They have songs with whimsical tones, but they don't have strong lyrics to back them up. And instead, we have lyrics like,
"While I was a pollywog, I never was a jollywog."
Or,
"Last night I wished upon a star, let all my dreams come true. And I believe it's worked so far, I really truly do."
They have the silly main characters and the mentor figure and love interest, but that's all they have to them. We have a villain who is cruel but not interesting. We also have the secondary villain who may not be so bad in the end, but with this one, I don't buy it. She was totally fine with kidnapping and attempted murder, but when Henrietta was taunting Zora about it, things went too far. The writing in this movie is just like, we've got to hit all the plot beats that Disney does, or we'll never be as popular as them. It goes through the motions without any of the passion. You know, this feels like the Disney equivalent of what the Cheetahman did to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's someone trying to cash in on the success of a recognizable brand without taking the time to figure out what made it work. Throughout the entire runtime, I never felt like I was watching some kind of charming fairy tale. I felt like I was watching someone try to make a quick buck. Maybe I'm being cynical, but everything here felt so fake. Style over substance. I hate to be the guy who sees something that didn't age the best and try to put more nefarious motives into it, but wow, the movie has some serious pedophilic overtones. Zora is 12, and the frog is at least in his 20s. The movie can say it's friendship over and over and over, but no, I don't buy it. One, he keeps giving her the eyes. You know the kind. These. Two, there's their strictly platonic friendship song, which ends with the frog making a heart. Ugh. And three, the kiss scene. Like, do I need to say any more? Need I say more? Overall, I see what they're trying to do with this film, but it just didn't work. It's goofy, but not in a good way. It's creepy, also not in a good way. And overall, it just rubbed me the wrong way. Look, if you're going to try to copy Disney, make sure you know what you're doing. I'll say this though, I'll take it over any live-action remake they're churning out, but that's not saying much, is it?
Watching the canon movie Tales version of Sleeping Beauty is like a quest in itself. To get to the visually striking moments displaying the tried and true portrayals of the classic fairy tale retold for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, one must trail through needless slapstick that detracts from the story, endure corny-ass songs complemented by horrendous synth music and plastic keyboards, and elves that are just kinda there for plot convenience, unnecessary padding, and... yeah, that's it, there's no third thing. but once you reach the end of the map, oh, it's passable? It's too bad the previous chain of events left a bad taste in your mouth, and remember that you wasted your time on a boring children's movie. That's how I felt. So I'm a huge fan of the Sleeping Beauty story. Ever since I was little, it always left a lasting impression as the most quintessential fairy tale that hits all the right notes and all the right cliches. And I mean that in the most endearing way possible as well. In particular, the interpretations from Disney and Tchaikovsky always struck out as the most honorable in celebrating the story and leaving out all the weird, icky bullshit. You know what I'm talking about if you've read Sun, Moon, and Talia. As it stands, it has remained an influential story that has been a staple in pop culture thanks to those two. Furthermore, it has been the subject of a few solo adaptations through the years, much like any other timeless story, although it doesn't have the luxury of, say, Cinderella when it comes to the monopoly of different versions beyond being included in larger packages and simple references. Most of the prominent adaptations come in the way of long-form novels like Briar Rose and The Ordinary Princess. Both of those examples take extreme liberties with either using the story as a juxtaposition to the frame narrative or subverting crucial elements for a new perspective. However, there are some major film adaptations that were able to offer something new to the conversation, extremely provocative, hyper-artistic stuff that would get your video demonetized ways, but still new regardless. But the one I was initially interested in was the massive project called the Canon Movie Tales. These were feature-length television movies retelling classic fairy tales, which... say they at least tried. And while some of these choices were more outlandish, with Puss in Boots being the biggest standout of this lineup, my heart knew damn well that I had to give their take on Sleeping Beauty a look, if that was the only one. Because it's the only one I've seen. There's only a handful of legitimate Sleeping Beauty film adaptations, and this is apparently one of them. Can't say I'm super pleased about that fact. Now, before I really get into the issues with this thing, I must talk about the best aspects. For one, when it wants to, this is one of the most visually striking interpretations of the story I've seen. It comes as close to the original descriptions and dreamlike wonder as it gets, especially with the castle interiors, which are simply impeccable for such a minuscule budget. Even the exteriors, as standard as they are, help add a more naturalistic flavor, which is further intensified when the Thorns completely take over the kingdom. Now, as for other aspects, I guess the fairies' costume designs are cool. The white fairy's fun, the red fairy's fun. The white fairy song isn't too bad. It's a generic lullaby. I'm sorry, that's all good I can say. But oh my God, how does something look this well produced, yet its contents just offer nothing except padding and barely any attention to the characters the children want to see? Sleeping Beauty herself, named Rosebud Frozen Peas, isn't fully introduced until the 40-minute mark. It may seem like a minor complaint, but, really think about it. If you were a young child first viewing this at your grandparents' house or at home after uncovering some obscure treasure chest of obscure VHS tapes, who do you expect to see the most in a film called Sleeping Beauty? If you need me to answer the question, please take a look in the mirror and say Bloody Mary 3 times at 2 a.m. Seriously though, a child wanting to see Sleeping Beauty would have to endure side characters that they wouldn't even associate with the story they know. And if you have seen this, I'm talking about the elves. Yeah, because, there isn't a fuck ton of old scriptures to work with to properly expand the narrative, or God forbid, actually do something more creative. No, we need funny little elves to dick around and pad out the runtime. All they do is add needless exposition and slapstick that lead to the birth of Sleeping Beauty. Essentially, the queen is like, "Oh, I want a child, but I can't give birth." And an elf comes in and is like, "Oh yeah, I'll be able to conjure up a potion that'll make you give birth." And it's just this little elf guy played by R2-D2 going around collecting all the right ingredients to make the potion. And this goes on forever. He goes to the Himalayas, he gets an apple from a tree to get its cider, he's fallen down, pratfalls, then further shenanigans happen as this elder elf is helping him out, and they're just kind of dicking around still and goofily conjuring up the potion. Then they have to go get the potion to the queen, but they have to make sure that the king doesn't drink it or something will happen. It's ridiculous. It's almost like they were trying to make the elves into Shoemaker at first, but they decided to just shoehorn this in as Sleeping Beauty because I guess they just didn't have enough to work with for elves in the Shoemaker. What is there to work with anyway? So they just were just like, oh, whatever, this'll help. People will be okay with this, right? No, it's distracting, and you just want to get to the good stuff.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it!
And yes, that's what I also meant by the 40-minute mark. It's that, and also the events of the original story that should have begun in the first 5 fucking minutes. And no, it's not even just the elves. A decent amount of the inhabitants have lame cartoonish acts that pad out the runtime too. Most notably the chefs, which at the very least were comic reliefs in the original story, so I can at least accept that. But they still take a lot of decent screen time away from the main fucking character. Again, what the kids are gonna be seeing. And if you thought that was bad, the prince isn't even a major player until over an hour in. And yeah, I get it, in the story there's like 100-year gap, but what's wrong with just having this be the whole of Act 3 rather than just the tail end of it? Couldn't they have just shown him maybe be a big stud in the kingdom, or have him slay some dragons, or showcase his kindness towards the commoners or something? Really showcase the fact that he's truly worthy of the princess's hand and saving her entire freaking kingdom? No, that's just too much. It's too much to ask for. We just needed more of the dumb slapstick and rip and tear of this subplot of the kingdom before they fall fast asleep. And we just need this little elf guy, now really, really old, to tell us that he was the one that is gonna take the princess's hand by doing absolutely nothing. Also, anyone who's still complaining about the lack of personality Prince Philip had in the Disney film should take a look at this and see if they still stand by that claim. At least Prince Philip was in a good majority of that film and not, like, whatever the hell this clod is doing. Oh, and the songs. You know, I hope you love discount Rugrats scores, and what I can honestly say are some of the most lyrically tone-deaf pieces I've ever heard in my life. Just listen to some of these.
So they rip. We haven't got a single, so they rip. Spurred by the flame that is burning inside, I've come a-wooing to win me a bride.
Yeah, riveting stuff. This shit's gonna sweep the Grammys, man. Ugh, they're all quaking in fear. Oh, this movie's so fucking stupid. Now, just so this doesn't end on a completely sour note, I will admit, going back to before, that it has some really good qualities in portraying the events of the original fairy tale. In particular, the gift-bestowing scene with the fairies, the finale with the thorns surrounding the castle, and the set pieces of the decaying kingdom really look good. And the prince scouring through it is just honestly haunting and easily the biggest standout, and I imagine that some kid would have been creeped out by it. And of course, the build up to where Rosebud pricks her finger on the spinning wheel and sleeps for 100 years, definitely a very well directed sequence. Nothing amazing, obviously, but these definitely are serviceable if you really enjoy the fairy tale like myself. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all I can say else that's good about it, because the whole thing, it's not worth it. I wish I could say a lot more about the awful qualities or the few triumphs it had, but it was such a nothing experience that I just can't be bothered to go into any more detail. Again, the production design is really good. I love the portrayal of the fairies, but man, does it suffer so hard from just trying to pad itself out with the slapstick and the songs and saying padding so much. It's not fun. I'm sorry, this might just be one of the most unsatisfying experiences I've ever had watching anything. Not because it's a heinously awful film or even just being a mixed bag, but because I just felt so much of my time was wasted just trying to watch this thing and talk about it. I really hope that the other guest speakers can talk about these things a lot better than I have, or at least get some enjoyment out of these, because this is not a very good first impression, and I'm sure as hell not going to be watching any more of these anytime soon. Honestly, you're better off just watching the 2011 erotica film called Sleeping Beauty. It has nothing to do with the original story, but goddamn, it's such a solid film. If your thing is provocative art piece films that'll get you demonetized, but hey, that's just me. Thank y'all for watching.
Oh dear audience, what words can be uttered to recount this horrid eyesore of moving pictures? Shall I compare it to apparel, so hastily stitched together of decaying fabric? Or to a soulless, rotting corpse infested with viruses? Or in plain English, where it can be described as boring, painful, and stupid? Yeah, shocked to say this movie is bad. Its existence isn't remembered for a reason, and it's not worth your time even to laugh at. But I know, you as the audience don't want me to just say this is boring. You want to have details, so details I'll give you. The Emperor's New Clothes is about a guy who is obsessed with fashion. So obsessed with fashion that he is a terrible ruler, but the people still love him because of his clothes, and still submit to him for that same reason. Well, there's some big event coming up, the fairy tale never actually specifies what it is, and he invites everyone in the town to audition to be tailors. Well, two crooks get a brilliant idea. They say they can make clothes that are invisible to those who are stupid or not fit for their position. The king thinks this is a great idea, and that anyone who didn't see the clothes would be removed from their position immediately. This puts the crooks in a great spot because it means they can just steal all the materials that the king would give them and run off with it, and no one would say anything. Except if that person is a child, in which you see that once he goes out in his underwear, because shockingly they didn't make anything, he would be called out and embarrassed by a kid. And that's where the fairy tale ends. I actually really enjoy the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. Obviously, it would never happen in real life, because it's a fairy tale. There is a nice message in the story about how emotional manipulation is dangerous, and how always questioning your own judgment in favor of a higher power is harmful. This movie does not expound on any of these themes, and instead makes all the characters stupid rather than threatened or an egomaniac obsessed with fashion. It also adds pointless subplots, a trying to be romantic relationship, and fails miserably. Non-character arcs, unresolved or forgotten plot threads, plot holes, and forgettable songs. Let's start with the story that, as you can guess, is a disaster piece. We start with two crooks about to be forcefully drowned in the ocean and then getting pardoned because of the king's daughter's wedding. This is not historically accurate, as if you were found to have a felony or a crime, you would have been annihilated in a lot of gruesome ways that I don't think could have been shown in a movie for children. Anyway, with the crooks now off and about, out again, they proceed to sell some new scam products, and the guy gets the attention of the princess who is in disguise. She doesn't want to be a princess and wants adventure and can't escape the tower. Oh, I wonder where we've seen this story before. Meanwhile, she is caught by the guards and taken away to get in trouble by her father. Her father is too busy whining that he needs new clothes for the wedding. I can't tell if it's every day or every week because he contradicts himself in the song. He also wants clothes that are very impractical, like pants with 3 legs and other stupid stuff I don't even remember. This was supposed to be funny. His daughter is then brought in, and he simply says she needs to dress like a princess, and that's it. So, he doesn't care if she's out? What's stopping her then?
God, Karen, you are so stupid!
Who cares? The king then demands new clothes and auditions tailors. The thing is by invitation only, so the crooks have to disguise and sneak in. Then the fashion show happens that shows off all the tailors' work that goes on for 10 minutes doing nothing. Then there is no outfit found during the fashion show, making it pointless, and the crooks promise impossible things to the king to get them hired, and hired they are. Even though there's someone suspicious of them, about halfway through the film, he suddenly decides to not be suspicious. So what was the point of introducing that? We then learn why the princess doesn't want to get married, aside not wanting to be a princess, because this is an arranged marriage. All in writing, this can't be broken in any way, shape, or form. But on top of that, they want her to marry someone they call a moron, someone I call creepy, because he literally backs her into a corner and tries to forcefully kiss her. He's then defeated by some totally threatening sword fight from one of the robbers, where he's still left alive and still in the castle. Why? The prince is easily the worst character in this movie, and for as dumb as everyone is, they all hate him. Although he only had 5 minutes of screen time in this, that was 5 minutes more than we needed. Back to the whole thing where the people come in and would see the work they can't see. The crooks, I guess, wanting to laugh, decide to ask 2 people brought in at different times what color the outfit is, leading to 2 different people getting 2 different answers and having to tell that to the king. Sounds like a great way to get caught. Then again, everyone is so dumb that they don't even know how to make the color purple. Yes, these are adults. And yes, this was considered funny. Yada yada yada, the princess knows the secret of the clothes not actually being existent, forces lover boy and Uncle Crook, don't think I mentioned they were related, to take her with them on their adventures. The king goes out in his underwear getting called out by a child, and finally, after the humiliation, it leads to conversations about who was the stupidest. The daughter and Crook then elope, and with the father's best wishes. The end. Where do I begin? I guess we can talk about the characters, or the fact that the character costumes are more interesting than the characters themselves. By more interesting, I mean more weird. Just look at what's on screen. Ah! The only notable character is the princess, but even she's just a generic princess following all the same plot beats. If you're curious, her arranged marriage was never resolved, where the prince just got away. He's still out there, like I said. I don't think some minor threat with a sword from a robber is going to scare him that bad. And the guy who said that this was all in writing or whatever just gets dropped. There's also something about the robbers not thinking they're robbers, and one's a good guy doing nothing good. This movie's a mess. Finally, on to the extra stuff. Songs, scores, costumes, whatever. Now, rather than talking about the songs, because this is a musical, and I happen to love musicals, good musicals, this is not a good musical, I think it would just be more fun and self-explanatory to sing all that I can remember, which is not much. Weaving, weave ho, busy with us weaving. Is this a love song? How can it be? Is this my cue to turn this to a rhapsody? Blue, 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 it's without any doubt blue. From his head to his toes, the emperor's clothes are blue, blue, blue. Wed, wed, wed is the color you should have said. From his knees to his nose, the emperor's clothes are red, wed, wed. Yes, they seriously said wed instead of red. Also, there are 2 songs missing from this because I don't remember anything from them. The only song I will give a note to is the Is This a Love Song, where I feel like if this were better written and in a different movie, this could actually be a fun song because it's parodying off of Disney-esque love song. The problem is, this is not a parody movie. It's not trying to be, so it's just out of place. As for the costumes, I think I've mentioned enough about that. The performances are there. The princess is probably the most memorable, and the king is serviceable, but once again, it's not the king in the fairy tale. The score was nothing, and the scenery was nice. Overall, don't watch this movie. It's a waste of time. You don't need to watch it. It's not fun to rip on with your friend. It's just painful to sit through. I remember loading this up and watching the first 45 minutes thinking, in order, this is average, this is boring, this is painful. Please don't watch this or any other canon films like this. If you want something more fun to watch, go watch The Emperor's New Groove. It's a very different story, but it's way better than this movie. Got it? Good. Shalom!
Hello everybody, my name is Valkaria, or you can call me Mitch, and today I'm going to be talking about a movie. It's a pretty good movie actually. I watched it a lot as a kid. It was really funny. The video game was great. I loved the plot. It had the Pod Piper. It was really good. So basically the plot of this movie is the hero, who's kind of fed up with being a normal person now, goes and decides, I want to change my life. So, he meets with this magical little man named Rumpelstiltskin. He signs a contract, and then everybody forgets he existed. It's like he never happened. Okay, so my producer behind me just told me I wasn't supposed to watch that one. Yeah, so I'm supposed to be watching something called Rumpelstiltskin? I'll go check it out. I'll be right back, guys. I'm never getting back that hour and 20 minutes of my life. Okay, let's talk about it. So I reacted to this live on stream. Twitch.tv/Valkaria__, always be plugging. But it was so fucking bad of him. Oh my, sorry, that was off script. I just had to react. It was so bad. Okay. So it was for some reason a musical. That's the thing I had to get through first, is it's a musical. I don't know why it's a musical. I actually kind of do know why. It was because this movie was supposed to compete with Disney. So, you know, great, a low-budget rip-off Disney film. How has that ever gone well? But let's just talk about the movie. The soundtrack was interesting. Some of the lyrics of the songs were interesting, such as Crown on My Head, Breakfast in My Bed, top tier line. The entirety of the Prince's Romance song was so lovely. It was not lovely at all. I'm not even gonna try sarcasm here. But that's not why you guys are here. You guys are here for music. What would I know about music? I play video games live on Twitch. Yeah, okay, I'll stop plugging my Twitch now. But I have to just say it was just not fun at all. The movie is very long. It drags on. At the same point, I know, but I just can't describe it any other way. The effects, even for an 80s movie, were really, really bad. It looks like something a kid could have made with a $3 million budget that is not shown at all. But yeah, and the golden string they use at the end was just party string you could get at the party store. So, you know, high budget right there. And the plot of the movie, which is, I know the plot of Rumpelstiltskin, but basically it's, some dude lied that his daughter could string straw into gold. And then rumors spread like wildfire. It's like, did you hear? She can become golden. Everything she touches, gold. Yeah, no, it just was not fun. I know that's like the actual plot of the story, but it's not a good plot. But yeah, all the effects looked really cheap. I don't know what castle they rented out, and I'm so sad that a castle has to have that on record. I know, my thoughts on the movie were, it's really boring, the music was just trash, and all the actors were just, to put this politely, middle school theater kid actors. But yeah, so that was my thought of the movie. Hope you guys enjoy, and happy birthday, Trevor. I'm probably never gonna be invited on this channel again. Goodbye.
By the way, I was halfway done writing the script before I realized I was sent the wrong film, which had some interesting moments.
As you are so really lovely. Allow an ugly old clone to give you a girdle of silk as a gift.
Anyway, back to the actual film I was supposed to be covering. The movie starts off with a classic storybook-like narration introducing us to a prince who's on his way back home to his kingdom. He and his men find themselves setting up camp in a part of the woods that they realized isn't marked on their map. The prince goes out to scout the area as he sings to himself about feeling like he hasn't found the right kind of treasure he's been looking for.
I'm going home with gold and silver from all the battles I've won. But even though I've so many treasures, I have a feeling I've none.
In a nutshell, he was singing about his lack of bitches. Coincidentally, he then finds a bitch in a glass coffin. Suddenly, a group of dwarves arrive and explain to the prince that the girl in the coffin is a princess that's currently under a spell. The dwarves begin to tell the backstory of the princess leading up to this point. We flash back in time to a castle in the snowy winter where we're introduced to a king and a queen. The queen had accidentally cut her finger while sewing, so she places her hand in the snow to stop the bleeding. That's when the king talks to her about how he wishes they had a child. Cut to months later, and it's announced to the people that the queen had given birth to a daughter, which causes the crowd to cheer in celebration. However, back at the castle, the queen is on her deathbed after complications due to childbirth. She holds her daughter for the first and last time and names her Snow White, then tells the king that their daughter deserves a mother and he should remarry. Years later, Snow White grows up with a new mother, a beautiful yet evil queen. Snow White sings another song with her father about how happy they are together.
Do you think that we could dance?
Yes, I think that there's a chance.
Which is the telltale sign that the king is going to die. The queen tells both of them to shut up and go to sleep, and as the king tucks Snow White in, he tells her that they'll be going on a hunting trip tomorrow. After the king leaves, Snow White sneaks out of her bedroom and eavesdrops on the queen, trying to fit into a tight dress.
Damn!
The queen orders her servants to leave the room, and once she's alone, she activates her magic mirror.
Mirror, mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest of us all?
You!
Snow White hides behind a corner as the queen walks out of her room. Once the queen leaves, Snow White sneaks back to examine the mirror. Snow White succeeds in reactivating it, and the mirror comes back to life in a pretty simple yet kind of terrifying effect. The next morning, Snow White wakes up her father as they both begin to joyfully start playing, but the queen, being a miserable hag, tells them to fuck off. Later, she sings about how Snow White would never be as beautiful as she is.
So you think that she's more beautiful than me?
We'll see.
That woman's ego is so fragile, she's threatened by a child, to the point where she hires a hunter to kill Snow White during the trip. On the trip, the hunter takes Snow White off course and attempts to kill her.
No, Hunter!
I must.
He tells the princess that he was ordered by the queen to do so and has no other choice. But as Snow White pleads with him to spare her, a goat passes by and he gets the idea to use its organs to trick the queen into thinking he finished the job. He tells Snow White that she must run away and find a place to hide, which is exactly what she does. Snow White runs through the woods until she comes across a small cabin where she sings another stupid song about how she's going to take refuge in it.
I could go to sleep right here and not get up.
Shut the up.
Later that night, a group of goofy dwarves arrive at the cabin and notice that someone has broken in, later finding Snow White sleeping in one of their beds. They decide to let her sleep, and the next morning they wake her up asking her what she's doing in their home. Snow White explains to them her entire situation, and the dwarves agree to let her stay with them, but not before singing another song where they all introduce themselves.
My name is Itty, and this is Biddy, and this is John C.
Confusingly cut to a few years later. Snow White, all grown up now, tends to some household chores, while the dwarves work digging in a mine. This all happens in yet another song montage. By the way, they just state that the king was told that Snow White was eaten by wild animals, and this causes him to give up his kingdom and just dies in a random battle. All of that happens off screen, by the way. Back at the castle, the queen asks the magic mirror who's the fairest of them all, and the mirror tells her that it's
Snow White in the forest. She survived.
Which angers the queen as she decides to kill Snow White herself this time. Disguised as a saleswoman, the queen arrives at the cabin and tries to sell Snow White a bodice. When Snow White tries it on, the queen tightens the bodice to the point where she stops being able to breathe and passes out. As the queen leaves, the dwarves arrive just in time to find Snow White unconscious and take the bodice off, saving her life. The dwarves conclude that it must have been the works of the evil queen, and that Snow White must be more careful next time. Cut to the castle where the queen is bathing.
Damn!
After her bath, she asks the mirror who's the fairest, and it tells her that it's still Snow White and that she's still alive. Again. The queen tries her luck a second time, now dressed as an Asian woman.
If you have lovely hair, you may want to come in there.
Bruh, and this version too? Was this in the original fairy tale or something? Jesus. Anyways, even though the dwarves warn Snow White about being careful, she proves to be an idiot and falls for the queen's tricks again. This time with a poisoned hair comb. Snow White passes out, the queen does her little goofy escape, and the dwarves arrive just in the nick of time to take off the comb and save her. Where she then promises to not open the door for anyone else. Again, the queen asks the mirror to confirm that she's the fairest. The mirror says it's still Snow White.
She is not.
She is too.
Is not.
Is too.
Is not.
Two.
Not.
Two.
Not.
Two.
And tries for the third and or fourth time now to kill Snow White. This time with a poisoned apple. And you'll never guess what happens next. Snow White actually doesn't take the apple this time.
And the sweetest. No.
Yep, I was surprised too. I wasn't expecting this. And psych! She does, because she's a fucking dumbass.
What is delicious?
Honestly, at this point, deserved. The queen goes back to ask the mirror the question, and the mirror finally tells her that it's her. When the dwarves arrive and find Snow White on the ground, they realize that she's been poisoned, this time with some sort of magic, as she appears to still be alive but in a coma. We then cut back to modern day, with the dwarves finishing up telling the story to the prince. That's when the prince decides to take Snow White's coffin back with him and his men, and as they ride through a blizzard, the coffin falls, causing it to open and for Snow White to spit out the apple, which, get this, flies through the storm into the queen's castle, hitting her right in the face as she sleeps. Snow White awakes, meets the prince, who immediately asks her to be his queen, and she agrees. She looks confused as hell in this scene though. Long naps will do that to you, honestly. Back in the queen's room, she asks the mirror who's the fairest of them all, and the mirror tells her that it's the prince's new bride. The queen loses her shit and breaks the mirror, causing her to slowly but gradually look older. The queen heads to the wedding, and when she arrives, she crashes the ceremony and faces Snow White. However, she begins to age faster, and eventually turns into dust. Everybody decides to ignore all that noise, and Snow White and the Prince kiss, and the movie ends. Okay, I guess. The movie felt like it was simply running through the motions of a Snow White story. At first, I thought they were about to do something new, as it started at the point where the story usually ends, but they just did the cut back to years earlier trope.
I feel like, we should start our stories where they begin, not start them where they get interested.
Get out.
I'm assuming they did it so that the introduction of the prince doesn't feel so random. The film starts off with a storybook-style narration to the audience, but then moments later, the dwarves start narrating the backstory of Snow White to the prince, which felt really off and not well thought through. Oh yeah, and the film really didn't need to be a musical. The music itself is pretty weak. I don't usually critique music because I myself aren't very knowledgeable about the subject, but in terms of how well the musical sequences are used to help tell the narrative, they were pretty bad at that. They felt like they were just there to extend the running time of the movie. Though the songs were mediocre at best, some were catchy, like the one for the dwarves, even though it was kind of annoying, and the one for the queen had some really good energy in its performance. Which leads me to the acting. The actors do their best, with the standout being Diana Rigg as the evil queen, but others, such as the two actresses that play Snow White, were just terrible, as their performances were bland and awkward, as well as lacking any sense of proper emotion.
No, Hunter!
What is delicious?
That being said, despite all that, I'm happy to say that the best aspect of the film has to go to the makeup and art direction. They really managed to up the aesthetic of the movie, and the visuals, such as the faces on the mirror and the queen aging, were really effective. My final thoughts on the film are that it's not very good but has some interesting aspects in it, but I still wouldn't recommend it to anyone. And that's all for my part. Thanks for having me. Subscribe to Aim by Frame.
Whoa, hey, it's my turn already? Okay, here I go. Hey you, it's me, V, one of the Media Mementos editors and the one who's editing the video you're watching right now. So you already got the rundown of canon movie tales. Bad, boring, enter third B word here. As a lover of fairy tales, let me just say Beauty and the Beast is one of my favorites. It's a tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme, and a pretty great love story. We've got quite a few adaptations out there. Some great, some not so great, some decent, I guess. Given canon's track record, I'm not expecting much, but it can't possibly be as butchered as the Super Y version, right?
One eternity later.
I have good news and bad news. The good news is that they didn't butcher the original story, automatically making it better than the Super Y adaptation. The bad news? It was one of the most boring movies I ever watched. So boring that I was left mentally drained only halfway through. The pacing is sluggish, the characters have as much personality as a plank of wood, actually less, cause that'd be an insult to Plank. The few musical numbers feel like jump scares because of how poorly all but one are set up. They're not even fun to listen to. And I resorted to multitasking to stop myself from taking an impromptu nap. Which, mind you, I hate naps. Canon's take on Beauty and the Beast is pretty close to the original story. Beauty lives with two sisters, two brothers, and a father whose fortune is lost at sea, forcing the family to move into a small cottage. Beauty's father travels to retrieve what he lost, only to arrive 2 days too late, get lost in a desert on the way back, and stumble upon a castle that mysteriously treats him well despite there being no master. After he's treated to a feast and a good night's sleep, he finds the castle garden and remembers Beauty asked him to bring a single rose back from his journey. But since he takes one without asking, the castle master reveals himself to be the titular beast. Hey, is it me or does he look like Mason from Wizards of Waverly Place? And he feels betrayed by the theft. Beauty's father apologizes and explains why he took the rose. The beast shows him a little mercy, allowing him to return home if one of his daughters willingly takes his place. Naturally, Beauty goes out of guilt, and Beast cares for her every whim, no matter how impossible it may seem. To elaborate on the movie's problems, the first one I encountered was the beginning taking way too long to go anywhere. It focuses a lot on Beauty and her family, but it should have been half the length. It takes up so much of the first act that we don't even meet the Beast until 25 minutes in. It's a waste of time, and the rest of the movie suffers for it. Beauty and Beast don't have enough time to develop convincing chemistry, which isn't helped by Beast asking Beauty if she loves him and will marry him all 3 nights in a row before she takes her month's leave, or the weird subplot that involves her somehow meeting Beast's human form in her dreams. Yeah, that's a thing that happens. Problem 2. This convoluted dream subplot. Beauty says she doesn't love the human form either because she only just met him, but she's quick to fall for him as she's led to believe he's hiding somewhere in the castle. She momentarily believes Beast is keeping him prisoner, but that gets dropped into a semi-love triangle that I just can't get invested in because it's very manipulative of him to chastise her for making him unhappy, coincidentally lining up with her rejecting Beast and not telling her why. The love triangle itself is also dropped quickly, so what was the point? Problem 3. The acting and dialogue. At first, I thought the acting was cheesy, kinda quirky, led to some unintentionally funny lines like this.
But my shoes! What about my shoes?
But once the pacing problem set in, the charm wasted away. This was made worse by the dialogue itself. Oh, where do I begin? There are a lot of awkward pauses a good few seconds long. Sometimes it feels like the scene's supposed to be awkward, but when everything's awkward, nothing is. And so many lines are so terrible that only a few times are they delivered in funny ways, even if it's most likely unintentional.
Beauty, I am Beast.
Seriously, how is that a real line? It sounds like something from that title drop cutaway in Family Guy.
The only way for me to solve this crisis is to be Superman 4, The Quest for Peace.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
And as if the awkward pauses weren't bad enough, Beast has this weird growling, gargly breathing effect. It's like Darth Vader's breathing noises, but if it was just annoying, grating on the ears, and it made the scenes where he tried to romance Beauty worse. Now that's to say, Canon's take on Beauty and the Beast isn't completely awful. Like I said earlier, some stuff is unintentionally funny, like the two aforementioned lines, the actors looking uncomfortable at the most inappropriate times, the Beast's fastest horse disappearing with little fanfare before traveling between locations, and that one scene where you can just tell how low the budget was. When the Beast's curse is broken, we don't actually see him change back. We cut to random fireworks that also distract Beauty, and then bam! Dream Prince! This is the kind of stuff I thought I was gonna get the whole way through. But what about the actually good stuff? While usually not gotten across very well, I do like some of the concepts. For instance, instead of servants, Beast magically makes all of Beauty's wishes come true, which I can assume is a secondary effect of the spell. Sometimes it helps him bond with Beauty better, learning what she likes and helping her let loose now that she's no longer obligated to take care of everybody around her. The most notable example of this is when he makes the statues in the garden come to life and dance with Beauty. He even gets sucked in for a little bit. It's a genuinely good scene that ties in with Beauty's arc and Beast's characterization, both of which I also like for the most part. While I could do without some aspects like Beast manipulating Beauty's dreams not cursed or unable to stop himself from asking her if she loves him and will marry him each night, the angle they're going at is pretty nice. Like in the original fairy tale, Beast was cursed by an evil witch. As a result, unlike per se the Disney take, he only gets angry when someone genuinely wrongs him and is otherwise a timid guy. He's so shy that he can't bring himself to properly interact with Beauty aside from eating dinner together at the table, or invading her dreams in human form. This matches well with the message of seeing with your heart. Beauty is at first uncomfortable around Beast, as many would be. But imagine, as the days go by, instead of Beast constantly isolating himself aside from dinner, Beauty is able to see that he's overall gentle and insecure despite his desire for company, so she invites him to hang out with her during the day. As Beast properly spends time with Beauty and grants all of her wishes, she helps him regain the confidence his curse took away. Oh, and she only gets to see the prince in her first dream and, after seeing him in the portrait, dismisses it as being just a dream. No weird, pointless love triangle. Really, with better execution alongside the obvious stuff like good acting, script, pacing, and song integration, this could have been a nice watch. But alas, this is canon we're talking about. The bag was fumbled, and whatever potential their take had simply could not be lived up to. Did I expect very little going in? Yes. Was I disappointed anyway? Also yes. I thought this was gonna be something I could find so bad it's good, but instead it was just tedious. If you really want to check it out for yourself, do what I did and watch it on Tubi. Trust me, the occasional ad interruptions will keep you sane. Well, as far as talking goes, I've done my part. Happy birthday, Trevor! I'm so glad to have been part of this. As for all you lovely people, don't go yet because there's still 3 more movies to unpack. But once you're done, please do us all a favor and check out all the other guest speakers here, myself included. Now back to the show.
Fuck. Hansel and Gretel. The classic Brothers Grimm tale of the 2 children who wander into the woods, come across a deceivingly sweet but cannibalistic witch, get captured by her, and proceed to literally boil her alive is a story known and told by many. It preaches the message of having common sense and watching out for strangers, no matter how friendly they may seem at first. Simple story, simple message, all well and good. So leave it to our good buddy Canon Movie Tales to take that story and kind of ruin it a little. Alright, being fair, when I first saw this movie, I was expecting a lot worse than what I actually got. There were some aspects of the film here and there that I surprisingly enjoyed. The witch Griselda easily steals the show. Her actress is fantastic and she was so entertainingly evil that I just loved her performance. The songs, while not amazing, were charming for what they were and fit their scenes okay. I really liked the set design for the gingerbread house. It gave me some similar vibes to the chocolate room from the 1971 Willy Wonka film. Obviously it's not quite to that scale, but I did get similar vibes to it. And the scenes with Griselda's reveal as a witch and her basically mind-controlling the kids to do her bidding were actually unnerving. They were well-done scenes with good camera angles and lighting. But unfortunately, they weren't enough to save this film as a whole. Hansel and Gretel themselves are believable enough as kids, but they were also really bland more often than not and don't have anything to make them different personality-wise from each other. You could pretty much swap their roles with each other at any point in the film and it wouldn't change at all. They're essentially the exact same character. The father character especially feels like such wasted potential. He has this subplot set up at the beginning where he's getting stiffed by the baker and it's implied that this is an ongoing thing, but less than halfway through that's apparently resolved completely off screen, and he spends the rest of the film aimlessly wandering the woods to search for his kids. He's an incredibly flat character that has any possible interestingness to him sucked out halfway through the film. If they wanted to set up Hansel and Gretel getting the breadcrumbs from the baker by having the father character have a history with them, that would be fine, but having it be entirely resolved off screen feels like a waste, especially when they don't do anything with the character afterwards. It's as if they forgot he was a character halfway through, and only threw in the scenes of him traversing the woods without any real thought of making it important to the story. And the mother character absolutely sucks, like oh my god. It's perfectly understandable as to why she'd be upset with the poor state that she and her family is forced to live in, but that doesn't justify the film having her be straight up abusive to her own family. She berates her husband constantly even though he's the one getting ripped off by the baker. She shows zero concern when her neighbor tells her that kids have been going missing in the woods and are presumed dead. She calls her own children stupid and idiots to their faces multiple times, and then straight up shouts that she'll never forgive them, never, when they accidentally break something, and intentionally sends them off into the very woods that she was just told 5 minutes ago children were going missing and getting killed in.
What the fuck?
I get that the movie needed to have a reason to have Hansel and Gretel go into those woods in the first place to get the main story moving forward, otherwise they wouldn't have met the witch at all, but this was a horrible way to go about it. A lot of scenes are super forgettable and don't really amount to much, especially when it's outside of the gingerbread house. There were also some various aspects that either confused or frustrated me. For instance, it's never made clear if the gingerbread children are in the cookies or if they are the cookies themselves. In some scenes they're shown to be able to cry or move their heads, or even have different facial expressions entirely, but when they're actually talking, their mouths don't move at all. And when they finally break out, the cookies look like hollow shells. It's really inconsistent. And in fact, why would the witch place them outside of the house at all? Wouldn't she just eat them on the spot, or at the very least save them for later in the house, since eating them is very much explicitly what she intends to do? And the film's ending is incredibly rushed. Hansel is about to be boiled alive and turned into a cookie by the witch Griselda, and she mind controls Gretel into bringing Hansel into the boiling room and tying him up. But then, for absolutely no reason, Gretel somehow breaks free of the mind control on her own with no explanation of how she did, and very quickly disposes of the witch by turning her into a cookie, which somehow makes the house blow up.
That's impossible. It doesn't make any sense.
It all happens way too quickly and is incredibly anticlimactic and unsatisfying. Like, I'm pretty sure the shots of the house blowing up afterward take up more time than the actual final battle. This movie has some okay aspects here and there, but on the whole, it's just really boring and forgettable. Not to mention it feels like it drags on for incredibly long despite it only being an hour and 25 minutes. It does the bare minimum at adapting the original fairy tale without adding anything new or interesting to make it worth watching. There's nothing of worth adding to the story to justify its length, which just makes it drag and put in too much filler just to fill in the story beats. Overall, while it's at least not the worst fairy tale movie I've ever seen, Happily Never After 2, I still didn't get much enjoyment out of it as a whole. And when it comes to fairy tale films, I assure you that there are way better options out there that won't leave you feeling quite as grim.
Hi, I'm Ian from OK Fine Be That Way. I'm here to wish Trevor a very happy birthday, and naturally, nothing says I just turned 25 like watching mediocre fantasy movies from the 80s. When Trevor asked me to cover an entry in the Canon Fairy Tales lineup of films, I took one look at the options, saw there was a Puss in Boots movie starring Christopher Walken, and immediately knew which one I wanted. No matter how bad this might be, I was sure I'd be able to get something out of it based on that fact alone. Even the Letterboxd tagline for this Puss in Boots movie reads, "These boots were made for Walken." So they were fully aware he was the selling point. Prior to this, my only real exposure to anything Puss in Boots related was through the Shrek franchise and spin-offs. Side note, check out Puss in Boots The Last Wish immediately if you haven't. Point is, I hadn't read the classic fairy tale, so my only frame of reference of what the character was supposed to be like was through Antonio Banderas' portrayal. Thankfully, the audiobook for the fairy tale is on YouTube for free, so I acquainted myself with it after watching this film. For those of you who don't know, the story of Puss in Boots is that an anthropomorphic cat owned by a miller is gifted to the miller's son once the owner passes away. The cat requests boots from his new owner, and upon receiving them, swears to help his owner become wealthy and powerful. In this regard, I have to give the 1988 film a little bit of credit. All things considered, this is by far the most accurate adaptation of the original Puss in Boots story I've ever seen. It more or less follows the same plot, with the one difference being that Puss in Boots is a shapeshifter that can turn himself into a human. This was probably done for financial reasons, but I'm not complaining because it gives Christopher Walken a lot of screen presence. Plus, other characters can shapeshift in this universe, so why not? There are other creative liberties as well. Much of it is padding, which is to be expected when adapting a short story into a feature film. Still, for the most part, the 1988 Puss in Boots is at least very faithful to the original story. The Puss in Boots from the Shrek movies basically shares no similarities to this story, aside from him meeting an ogre, I guess. Therefore, it's pretty easy to look at the 80s adaptation independently of Shrek comparisons. Speaking of which, the main antagonist of this film is an ogre that can shapeshift into various animals. This ogre does appear in the original Puss in Boots story, but only at the end during the climax. He occasionally appears throughout the film, I suppose to establish the stakes and, as I alluded to earlier, pad out the runtime. The actor playing the ogre does give a hilariously hammy performance though, even if the scenes he appears in are mostly pointless. I gotta say, for the first 30 minutes, I was kind of into this movie. It wasn't great by any means, but Christopher Walken had such an amazing energy that he was carrying the rest of the film easily. Since the first 30 minutes are almost exclusively following Puss and Corin, who is Puss's owner, I was able to kinda get into the dynamic between the two. Granted, the dialogue is corny and there are a lot of really bizarre scenes, but they are pretty hilariously awkward. How can you not love Christopher Walken prowling around like a cat and chasing birds? I'm actually kind of surprised scenes from this movie haven't resurfaced on the internet as memes, at least not as far as I'm aware. However, as the story continued and we started to get into the other characters more, I started to enjoy it less. The romance between Princess Vera and Corin is cliché, tripe, and boring, and unfortunately that becomes the focal point of the entire experience for a while. This makes any scene that Puss isn't in come across as kinda slow, which is unfortunate because he more or less becomes a secondary character in a movie named after him. Thankfully, the pacing does pick up again near the end when Puss goes to confront the ogre. A lot of movies fall apart by their third acts, but this one is a strange anomaly. It falls apart by its second, and picks up again near the end. Unfortunately, the second act really drags down the experience as a whole. Even the first and third acts are far from perfect in themselves, so I came out with pretty mixed feelings. Much like every other Canon Fairy Tales project, Puss in Boots is a musical featuring 9 different songs. Granted, 2 of the songs are reprises, but I'm gonna say that it has 9 to make it more cat-themed. Let me state that the score itself is really good. It's upbeat, whimsical, and really adds to the atmosphere and fantasy setting. The musical numbers, on the other hand, are all over the place. None of them are really that compelling lyrically, and a few of them hardly qualify as musical numbers at all. For example, the first quote-unquote song is called Prologue, and it's a 15-second chant that the peasants sing during the opening. I wouldn't even call this a musical number really, but it's listed in the credits as a song, so there you go. The two musical numbers that follow this are called A Happy Cat and I'll Watch Over You. This is when things really start getting entertaining, not because the songs are super amazing lyrically, but because Walken absolutely knocks it out of the park. He's a great actor, but he's an arguably even better singer and dancer, both of which are on full display. The next song is called A Gift for the King, and this one is weird. I say that because the song keeps starting and stopping, interspliced with scenes of dialogue. I understand musical numbers do this occasionally, but this is stretched to the point where it completely ruins the flow. The next song is called Love at First Sight. The scene is weird because it's two internal monologues happening at the same time between Corin and Princess Vera. The only visuals they show during this number are the two exchanging awkward glances with each other, which makes it pretty uncomfortable. Boring song in itself, but the presentation of it is pretty funny. The next song is called Gentile, and it's performed in two parts, one between Corin and Puss, and the other between Princess Vera and Lady Clara. Thank God this is Lady Clara's only musical number, as her singing performance is really grating.
His handshake makes your blood congeal. Now do you shrink or squawk or yes.
The other singers are good, but not enough to save it. This is my least favorite song in the entire film. Next, we have a reprise of Love at First Sight. It's still boring. Yay! The next song is called You've Got to Stick Your Neck Out Now and Then. Finally, we have another really good one. This is probably my favorite musical number because Christopher Walken's dancing is at its best. The song is upbeat and fun too, so I have no complaints about this one. We then end on a reprise of A Happy Cat, although it's also kind of a reprise of Gentile too. Pretty good way to wrap up the movie, so I have no issues with this. Overall, the musical numbers are not really that well written, but they do have a lot of positive elements to them, mostly through Christopher Walken's talent. They make for some of the best scenes in the movie, but the songs without him make for some of the worst. They're the textbook definition of a mixed bag. The non-musical parts of this movie aren't that great either, mostly due to the really hokey dialogue and obvious padding. The acting from the supporting cast is also hit and miss. The Ogre and the King have some fun moments, but the women playing Princess Vera and Lady Clara can't act at all. I'm pretty sure they casted Vera on the actress's singing voice alone, and Clara, well, she's not even good at singing, so I don't have an explanation for that one. Even so, there are things to admire about this production. The score, as I've stated, is very solid, and the sets and costume design are really well done. Could I recommend this as a quality film? Not really. Could I recommend it as an interesting curiosity? Absolutely. There are some positives to be found here, and I know I've brought up Walken a lot, but I really do mean it when he saves this entire experience. I was worried that him playing Puss in Boots wouldn't be as good as it sounded on paper, but it totally lived up to my expectations and more. If that sounds as awesome to you as it did to me, I would kind of recommend seeking this movie out. I watched it for free on Tubi with ads, which I personally believe is the best method for viewing it. It's not worth going out to buy or rent, but as a cost-free way to kill time for an hour and a half, this isn't the worst. Big thanks to Trevor for including me in this project, and I hope all of you Media Mementos fans enjoy the rest of these Canon Fairy Tales reviews.
In March 1989, Canon Movie Tales decided that after a good run of fairy tales, it was time to go out with a bang. It was time to...
It's time to stop!
So they put out one last entry, Red Riding Hood. And, well, this isn't one that you see a lot of feature-length adaptations of. Disney never made a Red Riding Hood Disney princess movie. And maybe there's a good reason for that. This story is pretty short, and not a lot happens in it. So, to stretch it out to feature length, you kind of have to add a lot, which is what any attempts to adapt it into feature length have been, and to mixed results. This one in particular, I'm still not entirely sure if I think the attempt was successful or not, but even at its best, it's no Into the Woods. So since we can't go around following, quote, Little Red Riding Hood, unquote, they actually gave her a name that wasn't just Red. So here's Lynette. Lynette lives with her mother, Lady Jean, in a village ruled by her uncle, Lord Godfrey. Played by Mr. Incredible himself, Craig T. Nelson, because, you know, we have to have our token A-lister in this. And Craig T. Nelson also plays Godfrey's twin brother, Lynette's currently missing father, Percival. So, the Little Red Riding Hood story wasn't enough, so they decided to throw some Hamlet in there. Okay. Lynette is described by all the adults in the village as being totally fearless. the only one who doesn't fear the evil Lord Godfrey. And to that I say, why? They kind of make it out that she's not afraid because she's not aware of how evil he is, but is that just because no one told her, or is it because she's a child? Because she's not the only child in the village. But they make a distinct point of establishing that she is the only one who's not scared of him. And that's a big deal for some reason. I don't really know why. And she even does get like scared later when she has this nightmare. So already we are off to a weird start. Now, Lord Godfrey is an interesting villain. The poster for this movie would have you believe that he is the big bad wolf. No, he's not. At least not exactly. It's kind of complicated, I think. So anyways, his men have brought in one of the villagers, Alan Owen, who's a farmer who can't pay his taxes, and Godfrey is not having it and decides to have him thrown in the dungeon. And Alan Owen calls him heartless, and that really strikes a nerve with Godfrey because it turns out he literally is heartless. So this guy sold his soul to this guy, the real big bad wolf. You might be saying, but that's not a wolf, that's just a guy. But don't worry, he can turn into a wolf with Windows Movie Maker fade transition effects. So this is Dagger, the wolf. He works for Godfrey because Godfrey sold his heart to him, which makes him able to transform into a human. And I don't know, the lore here is not explained well. I'm almost tempted to say it's kind of interesting and I really want to learn more, but the movie isn't interested in explaining it any more than this. So yeah. Side note, we really gotta talk about the wolf form. That's not a wolf, that's a dog. I mean, I get that they really couldn't swing a real wolf to film with, but like, you couldn't have gotten like a husky or something? I mean, this dog is kind of adorable, and it makes me really sad later when they're chasing it and trying to kill it. Like, come on, he's just a fluffy little guy. Look at him, he's not gonna hurt anybody. He's just a big fluffy doggy. Good boy, good doggy. Sorry, I got a little distracted there. In addition to executing people for calling him mean names that are actually accidentally very accurate, Godfrey is also just a huge creep who's constantly hitting on Lady Jean and trying to force her to marry him, so that's nice. But she refuses because she's still holding out hope that her husband Percival is alive. I wonder if he's still alive. We'll get to that later though. In the meantime, Jean is going off to try and spare Alan Owen's life because she really cares about him. He was just introduced like a minute ago, and the villagers in this movie, like there's a lot of like established villagers who are just like their friends, and I don't know, it's weird. It's treated like we're supposed to already know these people, but we don't. Like there's this guy Peter who is introduced right at the start of the movie and has a dynamic with Lynette and her mother, and we're kind of led to think, okay, this is an important character. He's a family friend, and he's a woodsman, so maybe he's gonna be the one at the end who cuts the wolf open, like in the original story. Some versions of it anyways. Some versions, they just had Little Red die. But anyways, no, Peter is not the one to do that. He's ultimately totally unimportant. Meanwhile, this Alan Owen guy is kind of a big deal, sort of. Like, I don't get why these two characters couldn't have just been merged into one. There was no need for two of these close family friend characters. But she manages to save his life by giving Godfrey some bread in a really confusing debate scene where they're bartering for his life with the bread, and she comes and she's like, I'm not gonna give you the bread unless you save him. And then he's like, no, but how about this? I'll make you a deal. I'll let him go if you give me the bread. And she's like, oh, fine. Godfrey isn't so easily swayed because, in his own words, power is not for the faint-hearted. Which is kind of an interesting concept. He was described as a very weak-willed, faint-hearted person before he gave up his heart. So there's an interesting story here about a man who gave up all his emotions that he thought made him weak for the sake of obtaining power to live up with his more heroic brother. It's a pretty compelling villain story, but they don't really tell the story. It's just kind of a thing in a Little Red Riding Hood story, so whatever. But he decides that he will set Alan free, but not before whipping him a bunch, which means he needs to go get healed. Fortunately, it's time to meet the next major player in the actual Red Riding Hood story, Granny. or Nanny Bess as she's called in this. She's some kind of witch doctor, I guess. I don't know how or why she has magic powers, but she does. She uses her magic powers to heal Alan Owen and he's good as new. Meanwhile, Dagger is trying to spy on them to figure out what they're up to, but he's continually thwarted by being a complete idiot and just falling over because Lynette was nearby, obliviously having her own fun and accidentally thwarting his plans. So, yeah, he's kind of a terrible villain who is not good at stuff. We'll come back to that in a bit. After healing Alan Owen, Nanny Bess gives Lynette that good old classic red cape and tells her it has magic properties that will keep her from harm. This truly is the moment where Lynette became Red Riding Hood. The next day, or whenever, this movie's not really good at keeping a consistent timeline, everyone's out in the field reminiscing about how good things used to be and how they really hope things will come back to normal when Percival returns and Godfrey goes away. But then Godfrey shows up and reminds everyone that Percival's dead. And we're left to wonder, is it true? Is he dead? Or, yeah, no, there he is. So, here comes Percival. He's back from the war for some reason, I guess. Just took him a really long time to get here. He meets up with Nanny Bess, who catches him up on what's been going on, Godfrey's turn to the dark side, and the fact that he has all of his spies, which he apparently has more than just the one, watching over Jean's house, so he can't go back yet and has to stay with her for now. Meanwhile, Godfrey's still being evil, and then he has this actually kind of interesting conversation with Dagger, all about the dichotomy of loving something versus simply wanting it. And okay, if it wasn't enough of a interesting look that this anthropomorphic wolf man servant who owns this guy's soul, this scene is so gay, and I kind of love it for that. Like, look at this. The two of them out on the balcony, standing back to back while wistfully talking about their deepest desires. Dagger straight up says that he loves romantic dinners by the sea. Come the heck on. You know, I ship it. So Godfrey tells Dagger that he saw Alan Owen out dancing despite being whipped some ambiguous time ago, and he needs to know how he was healed. So Dagger goes out to spy on everybody. And this part's kind of fun. He goes and tries to interact with the townspeople in his human form, but they're not buying it, which, again, just begs the question of, why is this guy supposed to be this super powerful spy that you have to sell your soul to him to? He's a really bad spy. But anyways, he decides to start chasing the maid around in his big, scary wolf form, and this chasing is actually kind of fun. I like how he shapeshifts back and forth to lead them astray. Of course, they have to leave out the actual shapeshifting because then they'd have to bust out the Windows Movie Maker Fade effects, which would have kind of ruined the scene. But even though he evaded the villagers, Dagger is dejected because he's not good at being bad anymore. We'll come back to that later.
All right.
So now, we're starting the setup for the real story to happen. Nanny Bess takes Percival home, but they have to keep their distance from the house so they don't get spotted. But he gets to reunite with all the other villagers who are preparing their siege on Godfrey's castle. Meanwhile, Jean is sending Lynette off to go bring some food and wine to Nanny Bess. Sounds familiar. She's not feeling well, even though she was just there in the last scene, feeling fine and wasn't even at home.
America, explain! Explain, what do you mean?
Side note, but if I had a nickel for every time a movie starring Craig T. Nelson had the exact same as fast as you can, exchange between a mother and a child character, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? So finally, through the river and over the woods to grandmother's house we go. And on the way, who should we meet but the big bad wolf himself? They strike up a conversation about the goods and evils of mankind, and Dagger finally sees his opportunity to figure out what's going on. He gets her to spill a little bit about what's going on with Granny, and the story goes about as you'd expect from there. He distracts her with some flowers while he goes off, and well, he doesn't eat Nanny Bess, he just scares her off, so she runs back to tell everybody what's going on, and then he starts cross-dressing. Perfect. I wouldn't have had it any other way. Back in the village, Godfrey has shown up and he's not asking for marriage anymore. He kidnaps Jean and takes her back to his castle. Meanwhile, Percival and all the villagers are getting ready for their attack when Nanny Bess shows up and tells them that a wolf tried to eat her And yeah, so that's more important. So they run off back to the cottage and find Dagger in this really weird half-human, half-wolf form. I guess because Lynette was too big to eat alive, he got stuck. Like, he had to turn back into a human to swallow her, but he couldn't because he was still Anyways, they cut him open. And it's actually kind of graphic. Like, we don't see anything, but we hear it. And, like, that's a person. But unlike Dagger, Lynette is totally fine. And you know what? I'll give them this. Setting up this red cape as something magical that will protect her from harm, and that being the explanation for how she survived getting eaten whole, that's some pretty good adaptational changes. It explains something that didn't really make sense in the original fairy tale and gives it some good meaning. Okay, I like that. So that wraps up the main Red Riding Hood story, but now we have to deal with the new main story and go save Jean from Godfrey. Time for an epic confrontation between two brothers. A climactic battle between a loving father and a husband and a heartless psychopath. Everything's been building to this. He shows up and tells Godfrey to leave. And he just does. That's the climax.
Well, that was pointless.
I guess the real climax was everything with the wolf, because that's the Red Riding Hood story. But like, Godfrey was clearly built up as the main villain of this movie, and his defeat is over in a few seconds with no confrontation. And then they just kick him out, and then he turns into a wolf because his soul was bonded to I don't know, they don't explain this, like, at all. Did I miss something? I watched this thing twice, and I don't know why this happens.
Explain!
Now, as you'd expect with these canon movie tales, the production value isn't great, but, well, it's not terrible. The sets all look fine, the acting is pretty okay, and the music is, well, it's hit or miss. We've got some pretty average songs, like this opening number where Lynette establishes her character, or this little lullaby that the mother sings. They're fine. They convey their points well enough, but they don't really do a lot. Then we've got the villain songs, and oh boy. So Godfrey's is the second one that happens, and it's not bad. It's lyrically kind of interesting, but pretty bare bones. Almost like a diet Hellfire. But the really cheesy instrumentation and choreography kind of makes this feel a little more I Am Mean than it does Frollo. And Dagger's villain song, oh my gosh. I mentioned earlier how a big part of Dagger's character is that he's not good at being bad anymore. Well, anymore is important there because this song is all about how he's good at being bad. That's the name of the song. And that's what the song is. He just sings about how he likes being evil. Seriously, this song is so bad. The worst part is, we never see him doing anything evil. It's all him just singing about it in this song. So he just tells us, I'm good at being evil. Then for the rest of the movie, he's bad at being evil, and is sad because he's not good at being evil anymore, but we never saw him being good at being bad, so we have nothing to compare it to, and he just looks like a stupid oaf. But then there's a couple songs in this that actually are pretty good. The first one is this big ensemble number, Green and the Blue. And that's the one where everyone's singing about how nice life used to be. And this one, I honestly really like. It sounds really nice, it's really catchy, really cheerful, it conveys the tone really well, and it has this wistful, nostalgic feeling. The choreography is really lively, all the ensemble is really engaged. It actually is just a pretty good classic Broadway sounding song that if there were a higher quality sound recording of, I'd totally listen to it. And then there's the last song, Never Talk to Strangers, which is a duet between Lynette and Dagger as they're walking through the woods and he's trying to lead her astray. And this one is also really fun. I like how it sounds. I like how the theme of it really ties into the Red Riding Hood story. Because this movie's not really good at tying into the Red Riding Hood story. So it's nice to have a song that really feels like it was written for this story. Like, in an alternate universe, this could have been Hello Little Girl. So all in all, this movie just comes out to be a really big mixed bag. And when I say mixed bag, I don't mean, wow, it has really high highs and really low lows. It's just has some neat ideas, but also is pretty dumb and isn't that focused. And it has some interesting context that it adds to the Red Riding Hood story, but it's just not context I ever wondered about. Like, okay, sure. Where's Little Red Riding Hood's family? What's her situation with her mother? What's her father doing? Like, I never cared to know those things, but I guess now we know. And I never really cared about why the wolf was sentient, but here it is. He's some weird cursed demon man. Sure, okay. It's just a weird movie. I don't necessarily mean that in a good or bad way. If I had to say, more so bad than good. But I can't call this movie completely bad, but I can absolutely call it really, really weird. I'm just gonna watch Into the Woods instead from now on.
And those were the canon movie tales. Weren't they just fantastic? Yeah, like I've said before, and as I'm sure many of my friends have said before, these things were nowhere near as great as they thought they were. While they thought that, yeah, having A-list actors and catchy songs would be enough to make billions of dollars, nope, that was not the case. And you know what? After listening to my friends review these movies in chronological order, I've come to realize that canon movie tales went from terrible to not great. But you know what that means, right? They were steadily improving. Not enough to actually be good, but they were getting better little by little. However, as Kyle pointed out, Little Red Riding Hood was too little too late. It seems like, judging by the limited box office returns we have, this project was doomed after Snow White, but they just kept going on because I still don't know. For the record, I share opinions with 95% of what was said here, which means that there's no reason for me to go back and talk about them. You're going to ask me to do it anyways, aren't you? Yeah, that's what I thought. So yeah, that was it for reviews on Media Mementos. Maybe there will be one or two here and there scattered throughout the next couple of years, but for the most part, they're leaving the lineup. It's all character quests, analysis, and production history from here on out. As I turned 25 today, or 2 days ago, we are also reaching a new era for Media Mementos, and hopefully, this one will be just as successful as the ones that came before. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you guys think? What do you think was the craziest out of all of these movies? For me, I gotta say, Frog Prince, yikes. They really started off with a bang, and not a good one. But what do you think? Comment below and let me know, because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. And now, it's time to thank our wonderful Patreon people, starting with our Masters of Fate. Chan 11, Drew the Stew, Kev Messick, Manny Paredes, MD the Dude, Quiet Chap, Ryan Williams, Timey, and Woody Woo. And now our executive producers, Aaron Vasquez, Albert Robinson, Blackjack, H.R. Hoffman, Indiscreet One, Ravioli Supremo, Unkale, and who else but Zane. If you two would like your name read at the end of every Media Mementos video, then please consider donating to the Patreon. There's a link in the description below for you to check out. And underneath that link to the Patreon, there's also a link to our Discord server, so why not stop on by and say hello? Alright folks, thanks for watching the video and I'll see you guys next time, alright? Okay.